Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome back to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from various locations here in the city of Detroit, powered by the Eastside Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Givens.
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the east side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you listen to us on. We drop a new episode every single week, so turn on those notifications. Today, we will be having a conversation about what's actually happening in the prison system here in the state of Michigan. Angie Jackson of the Detroit Free Press released an article detailing a class action lawsuit that the Michigan Department of Corrections is facing because of its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. As of Friday, more than 1,400 inmates are confirmed to have the virus, and 41 inmates have passed away as of last Wednesday. Is it possible for social distancing requirements to be carried out in our prisons and jails? Has testing in prisons been wrapped up? And what is MDOC's message to the public? Joining us for the conversation today is Shaka Senghor. Shaka is a native Detroiter and author. He is a director's fellow at MIT's Media Lab and was named in Oprah's Super Soul 100 list of visionaries and influential leaders. Shaka Senghor, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're delighted to have you. Also joining us for the conversation is Yusuf Shakur. Yusuf is a lifelong Detroiter, author, and co-director of programs at the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. Yusuf Shakur, welcome back to Authentically Detroit, sir.
What up, though, good people?
What up, though? And lastly, Victoria Burton Harris is joining us today. Victoria is an attorney and founder of the McCaskey Law Firm, and she is running for Wayne County prosecutor on a criminal justice reform platform in an effort to end mass incarceration. Victoria Burton Harris, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
We're happy to have you. Thank you all so much for joining us. So let's go ahead and get started. We know that we're dealing with a pandemic, but have any of you managed to find some happiness and laughter this past weekend? Anything funny? Anything fun? What y'all do? Yusuf, did you go to Belle Isle like the rest of Detroit?
I did.
Victoria, you were at Belle Isle, so you were...
I was at Belle Isle. I had a mask and I was social distancing. I went with my girlfriend, a mutual friend of Yusuf and I, and we had lawn chairs and we had living room dinner tray tables and we had brunch on the water as if we were somewhere on vacation outside of the country. And we're right at Belle Isle. It was awesome.
I heard that the police had to stop entry into Belle Isle. Like it was at capacity. Really? It was really that?
Well, we got there relatively early, about 11:30, because we feared the weather is going to be nice. This island is going to be packed. And sure enough, there was a backup onto Jefferson trying to get onto the island. So the police, they didn't shut the island down, but they did stop, people from entering for a while to give time for the folks on the island to get off and make room for more people. But my understanding is that we were all social distancing, following, safety guidelines and protocols. So we behaved just fine. I did see some folks, some bikers at the fountain that were not social distancing and not wearing masks. But for the most part, we were okay.
I love it.
What about those Go ahead, bikers? I think some of those same bikers ended up at Woodward and 8 Mile. My understanding is they were honoring, or they had some type of memorial for a fellow biker who had been felled by COVID-19. Wow. And they decided to honor him by risking disease themselves. And so, there is that thing called survivor's guilt. And I can only imagine that had to be what was going on. How do you honor somebody from this and show up with no mask in a dense crowd and think that's okay? And they did not have masks on, a whole lot of them. So that was upsetting. And they were not kids. There were kids that were small children in the crowd, but most of those that I saw in the pictures were not, young children. But hey, listen, I was outside. on my balcony, enjoying the beautiful weather. We got some plants and we were planting out there, and you know, Kevin always puts bird seed down, so we had the bird seed down to try to attract the birds. And I don't know if anybody knows about red-winged blackbirds. They are beautiful and deadly. My sister calls them devil birds because she's been attacked by one. So we're sitting there, and normally if you even look at a bird, they fly away. But this red-winged blackbird was sitting on a tree, and I was filming it because it was so beautiful. And I guess it got upset, so it came onto our balcony and started walking towards us. And so I have a video. I had to end up running inside, terrified of the bird. It's like the highlight of the weekend. But the beauty outside was just really something.
Shoot, the bird almost attacked you.
On my porch. I'm like, first we have the gangster goose. You saw the picture of the goose that was sitting on my balcony rail, just completely disrespectful. And now I got this bird. It's like, okay.
Y'all got to chill on those bird seeds for real.
Well, you know.
Man, Shaka, what y'all up to?
Oh man, my weekend was actually pretty chilled. I'm out here in LA now, so the weather is mostly lovely all the time, so I can't complain about that. But I spent the weekend with my son, just like he got this keyboard, and he's learning how to play. So you can imagine what that's like, an 8-year-old learning his first iteration of playing a keyboard. It's a very sophisticated keyboard that was a gift from a friend of ours. They saw him beatbox and they was like, yo, we gotta add to his musical repertoire. So I'm kind of dealing with the reality of a beatboxing, learning how to keyboard 8-year-old who's curious about everything in the world. So it's great. It's always good. You know, it's definitely took this time to connect with some family back home during the weekend. So a lot of jokes, just cracking, and we try to keep that sense of normalcy. So as soon as I call home or talk to any of my siblings or cousins, they're got jokes about my big head, and so we get it popping, old school Detroit style. So it was pretty good weekend for the most part.
I love it. Yusuf, what's up, man?
Man, I was working this weekend, man. Out distributing masks, putting up the posters, and then this morning I went over to the community house and I saw my little homies, man, and he had on all black and shit, black. He had a makeshift black mask. I'm like, damn, you about to go rob somebody? Like, we gonna give you. You need another mask, man. They gonna think you out trying to rob everybody.
That is such a real concern of mine. We crack jokes and we laugh, but as a defense attorney, I am sadly waiting for the phone call when somebody's gonna tell me, hey, I got picked up for something and it all started with me wearing a mask. I'm waiting for it, unfortunately.
I mean, the requirement of masks, I think, has given a lot of Black folks, particularly Black men, pause. It's like, yo, this isn't always necessarily safe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Especially like you called it out. He had on the black mask. It's like, yo, we need to get you one of them what are they called? The
N95.
N95.
You want neon joints though, your brother, man. You need one with cartoon characters. And,
right, like I come in peace. I am not a threat to you.
It's wild. Yeah. I mean, like even if you look at just like the way that police have been handling social distance in Black communities versus white communities they out giving out hand sanitizer and hugs, and Black communities they out cracking heads as usual. You know what I mean? So we gotta make sure we're not losing sight of like that part of our reality that still exists, even though we're in this global pandemic. The reality is what's been happening in our communities is still happening, unfortunately, and just the mentality behind that. So it's definitely a real concern.
It's in that racial inequity, right? That is embedded in the fabric of America from the very start. And this pandemic is just amplifying that. And we see that in the response to it, both, medically, and then in the response, within our criminal justice system or the lack thereof. We see it.
I mean, also to follow up the conversation we had last week to the article I wrote, identifying police brutality as a virus. And the virus that exists in our community is going to continue to rear its head. For Black folks, there's no social distancing from that. In all actuality, this is another excuse to come into our community and to function as an occupying army versus as engaging, loving, caring as they do in other communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we often have this conversation around the police duty to protect and serve, but we hold that up against the surveilling of communities of color, which is all too often happening instead of that protection and serving part. And so there are inequities built into the system that we have to begin to chip away at. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but Victoria is running for the Wayne County prosecutor. I'm so happy to hear about that, Victoria. Can't wait to hear more about it. This weekend for me, I'll tell y'all what I spent the weekend doing. I spent the weekend being trolled by people in Detroit calling our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, Big Buff Gretch. Have y'all heard about this?
Yeah, the G-Mac cast song made that.
I learned what buffs were this past weekend.
Listen, all I know is this.
I didn't know.
If Big Buff Gretch gets a pair of Cartier buffs before me, we gonna have a problem. That's all I know.
They actually got a GoFundMe campaign going on for her to get a pair right now.
That's me.
Yeah.
It's funny because go on.
Go ahead, Donna.
Oh, no, go on.
No, I got on the internet Friday morning. People were sending me these memes of like they superimposed like some Cartier buffs onto Gretchen Whitmer's photo. And I'm like, y'all have to stop. This is like funny, but I'm like, no, we ain't giving her no buffs. Not yet. And then Brandon Hunter at the Detroit Free Press wrote an article detailing the culture wants to give Gretchen Whitmer some buffs. And his lead was, to whom buffs are given, much is required. And then the rest is history. The song came out, they got t-shirts. It's a thing.
Yeah, when you think about that though, I think, the instinct is to be like, why? But I think one of the things that, when we're looking at these moments right here, like true to who Black people have always been, we've always been the one to try to include people. We've always been the ones who open up the barbecue to people because that's inherently the humanity that we, exhibit consistently. The reality is though, people will exploit that and take advantage of it when it works to their benefit. And so, we got to hold people accountable. When you invite people to the barbecue, there got to be a level of accountability in regards to, are these people really allies, or are they just utilizing the social prestige that they get at our benefit to elevate their status in society to continue to oppress people? You know what I mean? And so I don't know enough about her politics to give her a pass. I do know the young man who made the song. He always makes great kind of satirical songs. I think that's the genius of him, G-Mac Cash. He's like just a dope young brother who uses, his creative voice to just, talk about things that's unique to Detroit. He got the song about the potholes and the snow and, the weather. But I also think there's, for those of us who are operating out of a different space, yeah, it's cool. Come on, pull up to the barbecue. Don't bring no raisin potato salad though, you know what I mean? But understand that this is not a space where you can just come in and, run amok and not be held accountable. So I think it's just true to who we are as people. And I do want to speak to something else too about like this aspect of like our people constantly coming out, because there's a lot of criticism about us not following the social gathering rules. And what I haven't heard enough of is the reality that some people don't have a safe home to go to, and they don't have spaces where, being inside is more, is less of a risk than actually being outside. And, then also just for us to grow up in the community, in the hood, like you grew up on a block where, everybody done been shot and been, in prison. Like the last thing you're worried about is catching what appears to be a cold if you don't have that true knowledge base, you know what I mean? So I think our community has to have another level of like sensitivity and understanding about why these brothers and sisters feel like, going out and getting out and connecting is more important than staying inside when we don't even know if they got a safe place to be inside. So, it's
in addition to that, Shaka, we also are not remembering that when you talk about knowledge, that requires Black people to trust the folks given the knowledge. And historically, Black people have very rarely been given a reason to trust the government. And so when you say, well, the information is out there, point to a point in our history as Black folks that the government has provided helpful information to us and for us, and you'll be hard pressed to find those moments. They exist, but oftentimes when you trace them back, they exist to a benefit that benefits them more than us. And that calls into question how often we are trusting the information fed to us from the government. And at a certain point, we got to acknowledge that it's not some folks' fault if they don't respect, trust, understand, and therefore be able to take and implement all of the safeguards because of the knowledge that they just won't acquire because they simply don't trust the source.
Well, but you know, I think that I get that to a point. But when our people are dying and people are saying, oh, they're not really dying, that's been manufactured, that's something about that that hits me in a place right now where I think that we also have to hold each other accountable. So I'm all with you about not having safe spaces. I'm all with you when you come to government misinformation. The government's not doing a good job. And actually, I don't trust our government to communicate well. Our government says things like, we're trying to flatten the curve. Who the hell is trying to flatten the curve? That's not something that is on the top 10 list of anybody I know. So I think that we've got to change the language, own it, and be the messengers to our own people, because our people are the ones dying more at a faster rate, at a higher rate. We're getting sick and dying more than anybody in this community, and nobody's going to care about us more than us. So I'm really hoping to move it from public health conversations to us really in the village talking to folks. But I think that, you know, we talked about it last week, the whole construct of social distancing is not a construct that's helpful to people who live in interdependent communities where I need you in order to survive. Or as Shaka mentioned, I'm couch surfing and I don't have a home. So how can I social distance? We're doubled up or tripled up inside this home, or where home is not a safe place as it is not for too many children and too many people in domestic violence. So I think we have to have further conversations. I think we also have to acknowledge the fact that the people who are disobeying this order are frequently white people. Like if I want to see people without masks, I just go to the suburbs, okay? I go to Home Depot in the suburbs. What'd you say?
Go to Lansing.
Go to Lansing. Well, I'm not doing that. But when I went to Home Depot, I look at them and I look and I always feel like I can pick out the Republicans because they're the ones walking around without the mask on. So it's like, okay, yeah, he's a Republican. She's a Republican. I have no idea if I'm right or wrong because Karen Whitsett is actually voting with them. So apparently some Democrats are there too. But in general, when I see people walking without masks in defiance of that order, I see Republicans and young people and people who are being very dispossessed, and they're coming from a very different point of view.
So here's the thing that we have to face is there's a world of folks who are Black live in a totally different world, and they've been suffering, dying on our watch for multiple generations, and it's only until a pan-epidemic that they become a topic of conversation that's very surface. And in reality, the question: are we willing to go in their world? I mean, some of us do, but are we really, boots on the ground in their world, trying to help them, engage them? Besides, treating them like an experiment. Besides treating them as something that we're trying to profit off of. We're mirroring the system that's oppressing them. And then fundamentally, when we look at granted, the governor, Black people, we have an ability to forgive real quick, love deeply, but in reality, she hasn't said nothing about the prisons. In reality, she hasn't said nothing particularly to the water shutoffs and things of that nature. So I get it. Same thing when we call Bill Clinton the first Black president, right? It was a joke. But again, the joke is on us. The accountability is on us being able to transform our minds of how we really love ourselves and stop looking outside of ourselves for leadership first and foremost, and looking within ourselves. There's a lot of deep contradictions that exist within the Black community on every level that we have to address, and we won't be getting to the point where we're looking outside ourselves. Before all this, she was trying to close the only high school in Ben Harbor. I was there. I heard her. She wasn't engaging the people. She wasn't listening to the people. Is that a total indictment on her? No, but it is a reality that we have to deal with.
I do want to point out that she did have an executive order demanding the water be shut off. and water cannot be shut off until the emergency is over. So she spoke to it. Now, whether or not she is enforcing that executive order at the rate she should, there is an executive order, and there were funds put aside to turn water on for Detroiters by the state. The problem that we also have is also monitoring and giving feedback and making demands and saying, this is your executive order, here's the law, and here's how we deviate from the law. And I've been trying to do that on my own, just trying to point out some things and trying to push that up there. There was an executive order regarding prisons. The executive order did not go nearly far enough, but there are some orders there. And I think that we're coming off of 8 years of Rick Snyder, who poisoned Flint. And so people feel as though they can get somewhere with Gretchen Whitmer. And I'm one who thinks that she especially didn't start out where she should be. I was actually quoted in Metro Times saying that, that there's a far distance where we need her to be to where she is right now. Sometimes I think you invite people to the picnic so you can get them up close and personal and hold them accountable. And so if that's what we're doing at the picnic, at the barbecue, saying, now that you're here, here's what we need you to do. More of us need to be doing that and using our voice and our power to push her to a different perspective, because I agree with you, Yusuf. It's all about us communicating with our own people. It's about us taking leadership into our own hands. It's about our heroes and our leaders really doing it. But at the same time, she is the governor, and we can't release prisoners, and we can't really change policy unless we can get the governor to change what she's doing. And so I agree with you. She hasn't gone far enough. I have not been necessarily happy about all things, but I was happy about the stay-at-home orders. And I do think that she spoke out against racism today. And so I'm hopeful that there's movement. And maybe I'm just an optimist, because I want to be hopeful that there is movement and that our government is going to become more accountable.
I doubt it. Like, I'm not that optimistic, but I'm optimistic about the people, because I think that's what really matters ultimately. Like what Yusuf said earlier was something that, we have to reinforce for the audience. There is a Black America that goes largely unacknowledged. And like me and him, we're both parts of that world. It's like everybody wants to talk to us now. Nobody want to talk to us when we was 14, 15, homeless, hustling, surviving, getting shot, shooting. Nobody wanted to talk to us. And those are the young brothers and sisters who are getting the most criticism for being out there in the community. And the reality is we don't go this hard for a pandemic that's been existing in Black communities for the last 4 or 5 decades. You know what I'm saying? Like, the levels of gun violence, how many young people get shot in Chicago and Detroit, like, I'm sure it's been more people who probably died from gun violence than this pandemic, you know what I mean? At least from our community, you know what I'm saying? And so, those are things that it's easy to be like, oh, you got to think about saving lives, but how can you save a life when nobody's trying to help you save your life?
We lost over 1,000, almost 1,100 Black people or people in Detroit in a month. We have never had a gun violence epidemic that high.
But it's at least 1,100 people between Detroit and Chicago have been shot in the last year.
I'm not minimizing your point. I get your point. I'm just saying that the scale of it in Detroit is so scary to me. When you look at the fact that we have lost 1,085 people and about 9,000 people are sick with COVID-19 as we speak right now. When they're sick, they're extremely sick. It's really, we've lost heads of family. And so I think that I don't want to minimize the pandemic. And also I don't want to minimize what you're saying. And that is that there has been a longstanding indifference to the lives of Black young people, and in every way, from academics to gun violence to whether people have a safe home. I get that, and I agree with you completely. I think that we can acknowledge that, and that's why we want to talk about on this show, and at the same time understand that we need to do something to address the deaths that are upon us right now.
Can I just say before we go on, Yusuf is not going to stand up and say it, so I am going to say it for him. He has been exactly what we all have just got done saying we need in our community. I have watched him go into communities where there's maybe even 1 or 2 houses on the block. That's it. And he goes in and he finds people and says, young brother, here's a mask. What do you need? He's been doing that for years with his back to school rally, with food rallies, with anything that he thinks the community needs at any given point, he's been doing it. So when we say that we have to have those conversations, I like for us to move to say we need to take the action and then acknowledge those who are taking the action so that we have an example to follow, and then we can all get on that train, because that's ultimately where we need to be going, and we need to get there quickly.
Well, I understand, and I didn't mean to in any way minimize the use of. This is his second time on this show, recognizing what he's done.
I was waiting on him to share that he's been doing that. Like, I just saw he got a shipment of 3,000 masks, and I'm like, well, he's not going to say it. I guess I'm going to have to.
Wasn't it 10,000? I was going to call you and ask for a mask. I mean, 10,000.
I was going to call you and talk about like making y'all site a distribution site. So I got you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure they're happy to have that happen.
We do have, we only purchased 1,000 masks.
Okay.
And we're putting together care kits. We're passing out masks, hand sanitizer, toilet paper, because we have a lot of toilet paper in empty buildings. And if we're not going to be in those buildings using the toilet paper, we might as well pass it out. We have home cleaning products that we are creating out of our disinfectants in our office so that we can help people, because we survey people. And the number one request was personal protective gear and also home cleaning products. So we're trying to get at that. I really admire the work that Yusuf has done. It's our responsibility to protect our own people. It's our responsibility to educate them and to help them understand the life they save may be their own, their mothers, their fathers, their kids. We're all in this together, and not make it about the Tuskegee experiment, which is a horrible stain on our history, but we can make it about us and take it away from the governmental conversation.
I mean, as we transition to the next conversation, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And that's the thing that we have to understand, but also when we talk about accountability, I mean, it's on our watch. I mean, everyone on this panel in some way has been impacted by some level of oppression of being Black in America. Some of us have more scars than others, and how we heal those scars, how we you can't heal nothing that you don't confront, and there are some ugly things within our community that we responsible for, but the larger society. I mean, it's oppression. Yeah. And again, same thing with voting. Like, people, you should vote. Well, I don't believe nobody. I don't think they're qualified enough for me to vote for them. But we criticize them versus listen to our people and being able to educate them. And that's always. And we're all at different spaces. And how do we create a space that's value centered around serving our people and uplifting them? Because everybody plays a role. But if we don't have the right values, then the roles will begin where we're fighting each other.
I for one appreciate the illustration about just talking about this world that normative society has essentially left ignored, unless, as Nicole Hannah-Jones said, unless they burning something down. So I appreciate it. And Yusuf, I just want to bring this point full circle, that even in your Deadline article, you talk about the social connection as a means for survival for some Black people, right, in the city of Detroit. And that's a real thing. And Shaka spoke eloquently to that without even referencing the article. But while we are here, because we've already even began talking a little bit about the governor's inaction as it relates to what's happening in the Michigan Department of Corrections, I really just want to begin this discussion and center it on some numbers, right, and have you all sort of respond to some of these numbers. So when you hear numbers that 1,825 inmates within the Michigan Department of Corrections have contracted the coronavirus, and over 40 inmates have died from coronavirus complications, and over 200 MDOC employees have tested positive for coronavirus, what is your reaction? Victoria, we'll start with you.
So, I work with this population very intimately as a defense attorney. And my position is that people go into prison expecting, for the most part, to come out hopeful, I'll put it that way. When you talk to some folks, they may say they never expected to come out. But for the most part, people, they hope to come out. And what we've done by failing to act quickly and act boldly is we've turned a prison sentence into a death sentence. And when you think about the reason why we've done that, it goes back so many years and is so many layers deep. We put people in prisons that we think are bad people, not people that we say we want to rehabilitate, because prisons don't rehabilitate people. And when you put a person in a prison because you think they're a bad person, you throw them away. And that is why so many folks in power can sleep at night knowing that they're not doing a damn thing for people in prisons, because they think that you're a bad person, you should be taken out of society. So when this pandemic, we have to be on the front line and save lives, but those lives don't include those that we've thrown away. And then when you think about why we've thrown them away, it goes back to this something that you spoke of earlier. You will label people in this system as dangerous, and that narrative that we speak and we share, it goes back to Jim Crow, to slavery. When you see a person of color and you think danger for whatever the reason, you immediately act on that without even realizing it. And that's what we've done by putting people in prisons. People like to think that, oh, mass incarceration is, it started with the war on drugs. No, it didn't. The war on drugs, it just fed Black bodies into our prisons. But it really started when we came here. It started with slavery. And it's just continued, and it just morphs into something bigger and different, decade after decade. And so to go back to your question of what does that make me feel, I cry inside because those people look like me. I've held the hands of many of those people before they went in. And it is shameful on all of us, if we are not actively doing something to combat that, because they are throwing our people away, and they're now throwing them away to die. And it's our responsibility to do something.
I love the way you phrase that, because I think that the language we use makes a difference. And so when we talk about prisoners, that implies one thing. When we talk about people who are imprisoned, it puts the emphasis on the personhood of the imprisonment and takes it away from, you don't get to relabel them as something other than people. And I think that we use language sometimes to marginalize people even further. Shaka, Yusuf, I've been thinking about this. I know you touched on this, Victoria, but this whole concept, what is the purpose of a prison, right? Because we call prison guards correctional officers, and we act as though this is a correctional institution. And yet prisons don't really seem geared at all towards correction. Is it punishment? Is it prevention? It seems as though it's more punishment than the other three things that they sort of describe it as. What is your experience with that? And how do you think that plays into our treatment?
So it's interesting, like we started this conversation earlier and I was just making remarks regarding the books that's behind everybody's heads on the thing. And it takes me back to a time when Yusuf and we were in the same prison. For people who don't know our story, like me and Yusuf met when we were basically kids at Michigan Reformatory in, was it 1992, 93, 92, somewhere like that?
94.
94. And I had actually just left a prison with Yusuf's dad. And I remember this one day when Yusuf got took to solitary confinement for having a book, trying to take a book to work. Well, we worked in the kitchen, we would work, and then we would break down from our work, and then we would just study, we would read different groups and, debate and all those things. And so to me, that was something that stuck in my mind for the rest of my incarceration, is that we would be punished for trying to learn, punished for trying to stand up for our humanity and have a sense of dignity and pride about ourselves. And, even now, when I go back inside prisons, I'm always triggered by that reality that, we're going in trying to bring a message of hope. And there's a possibility that the recipients will be penalized if they even show any interest in coming to share that experience with us. So prison, for the most part, has been an extension of slavery. I mean, like when the 13th Amendment, it was a loophole. It went from, the enslavement to, if you've been duly convicted of a crime, you can be subject to involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude means working without compensation. When Yusuf and I were working in the kitchen, we were working for 17 cents an hour at the entry level. And if you made it beyond that, you might make 23 cents or 36 cents an hour. And so what we utilized that time for, it wasn't even about us being employed. it was an opportunity for us to actually be social with each other, build with each other, to, you know, really challenge our thoughts and our ideas. And so, you know, for the men and women who have got out of prison and who you see on these platforms that are speaking to those issues, it's not because of what the prison done, it's what we did for each other. Like, I wouldn't be the man I am without the brothers like Yusuf and his Baba and, you know, Gangsta Al and all the brothers who poured into me when I was, you know, coming to prison, and then the brothers that I poured into in turn. And so, you know, what we've tried to do since we've both been out is exhibit what's possible when you give people the right resources, not just resources, but the right resources. You know, reading Malcolm X, that spoke to who I was as a young Black man navigating the world of incarceration, and seeing somebody who went through it that can come out on the other side, you know. And so, you know, to your question about those numbers, out of the 8 out of the 10 hotbeds for COVID virus in America are in prisons or jails. One of those prisons happened to be Lakeland Correctional Facility, which I spent time at. You did time, we all did time at there, and like
my parole there.
Yeah, he got his parole there. I was on my way home when I first, you know, I was on that path to coming home. I went through there. But some of our friends, so I get calls every weekend, as I'm sure Yusuf does as well. But 3 guys in particular, JRX, who was a guy that we grew up with at Michigan Reformatory, a brother named Simba, who also grew up with us there, and then my guy Big Al, who I met at another correctional facility, but who's there now. And, you know, these phone calls are heartbreaking, you know, to hear men that I grew up with when we were boys who have been in there for over 30 years. And they're in conditions that are deplorable. They haven't figured out how to test in a way that, you know, makes people even feel safe. They've confused some of the tests. They got some false negatives back, all type of stuff. And they're intermixing people in a very congested environment. That facility doesn't have a lot of cells, so it means that people are in open cubicle spaces. So it can be anywhere from, you know, six men to a cube to 30 or 40 in an open gym setting. So there's the impossibility of social distance is real. And then it's also an aging population. I mean, these guys are, you know, they went in when they were 15, 17, 19, you know, now they're in their mid 40s. But there's other guys who was there when we got there, you know, who are in their 60s and 70s, and, you know, they're trembling in fear right now, you know. So we're doing everything we can to, you know, raise awareness and get people resources. I worked just a few weeks ago to get 100,000 masks delivered to Rikers Island, to a prison in Mississippi and Tennessee. And obviously I'm from Detroit, I'm from Michigan. That's where I wanted to be able to get those resources immediately, but we don't have the liaison there, you know what I mean, in terms of governmental person that can say, hey, whatever resource you can pour our way, we got it. I got people who want to, you know, add the resources. So it's just, you know, it is a humanitarian crisis powder keg. And what I mean by that is that it's going to blow up in our face in a way that we're going to look back on this thing and say, we had an opportunity to be courageous, and we opted out of our fears and our inability to govern to choose cowardice and not do anything and let people die. And the reason that they're letting people die is because it's the same reason it's always happened in our communities. Primarily Black men, you know what I'm saying? The fastest growing population in prisons is Black women. So this is a reality that we can't talk about without talking about the indifference to those of us who come from our community.
Yusuf, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to some of what was already said.
I mean, fundamentally, when you hear the numbers, I question them because, one, they don't include the women population. So that right there is screwed. And then fundamentally, as Shaka talked about, I mean, it states in the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as a punishment for a crime. So the same amendment that abolished slavery made it illegal. I mean, I get a call every week from my father, you know, who's detailing me what's going on. I mean, it just brings back to the reality of what it's like in there, and what it's like in there. You're talking about if oppression is going on out here, imagine what it is in there. I mean, again, what we experience in black communities. governed by white officers who comes in every night. But you're talking about a place that's in a very rural area, that's hundreds of miles away, with no supervision. They can do whatever they want. They can make it up. They can create a narrative because they have the power, and their whiteness supports their power, supports their ability to convey whatever they're going to say. And more importantly, we've already been labeled thugs. We've already been labeled such and such, right? And I mean, what's heartbreaking more than anything, we get caught up in this game of, we're gonna fight for the non-violent folks. Well, what the hell? What about they're all human. We should fight for all of them. And that's what's most disheartening. I mean, to Shaka's point, yeah, when is enough is enough. When have a person done enough time that they can't get an opportunity? Are you saying that we don't have enough creative genius in our ability to think different, to make radical decisions that they make every day? That these human lives are not worth us being able to think. I mean, we got a bunch of abandoned houses in Detroit. Hey, put them in there. I'm pretty sure these guys get them together. You know what I mean? It's millions of things that we could do.
That was why I raised the question of the purpose of prison, because if the purpose of prison is not to punish unto death or whatever, then we need to be doing something very different. I mean, there might be a few people who literally need to be kept away from other people just because they don't have the ability to govern themselves. But there are so many people who are not at risk. And so there's no real basis for keeping them locked up that I can see. I've read studies that say that if you lock people up for more than 5 years, it doesn't serve any purpose in terms of 5 years, they say, in some study I read, is the maximum amount of time before it becomes, cruel
and unusual punishment.
Cruel and unusual punishment before any beneficial aspect. And I'm not going to even try to talk about the benefits of prison because I'm not that advocate. I'm just saying that I've read some studies that say 5 years at most. You have people in there, as you pointed out, who've been there for 30, 40 years, who are not a risk, who don't pose a risk to the community, but are kept there. And there's got to be a reason for keeping them there. Why the governor comes out and says, and this is a low point for her, when she said that she doesn't see a way to release any prisoners.
Here's the thing, right? The risk is that the system will be exposed for the fraud that has been for all these years. And that fraud being that it's in the best interest, safety, and well-being of the community to have prisons that exist as they currently do. Under all the arguments right now about who to release from prison, me and Yusuf would not be sitting here. Like, neither of us would be sitting here because we both fall up under the violent offender, right? But I can promise you in the last 15, 20 years, collectively, we probably accomplished more than most people who've never been in a prison will ever accomplish in their life, right? And that's because we had the rehabilitative tools of having our peers challenge our thinking, having our mentors be men who come from where we come from. And so the only risk politically is their fear of, there's somebody who's going to come out and do something bad, and then that'll make it hard for me to get reelected. That's always been an argument. That's always been an argument to run these fear-based campaigns instead of saying, you know what, we're going to pour the resources in to ensure that people are coming home healthy and whole. The thing is, no, we're going to just lock people up longer because we don't want nobody to get out and do something wrong. But the thing is this, is if you treat people barbarically, inhumane, degrading, there's no shocker that people will come out and do something wrong because they're being reactive to triggers that are deeply embedded in their experience. And that's what's really happening. Like, again, we're fortunate in a sense we had incredible mentors. We were literate. Like, literacy is a whole another animal, right? So like we were able to read, you know what I'm saying? And so the way this system is structured right now, nobody wants to be accountable. But the flip side is this: when we was in prison, every time they got into a budget crunch, you know what they did? They closed prisons down. And and let's just say their argument was, we don't want to release them to society. They have the capabilities to move enough people around to where they can actually socially distance. So the reality is they just don't care. Because when I was in prison, it was about 60 prisons. It's probably about 28 now in Michigan. That means that there are facilities that are open, just like there are a lot of vacant houses in our community. There are spaces that they can, you know, if that was their goal, so that's not their goal, and we just got to be real about that part. You know what I mean?
I mean, you also a point that most people in the community will never know about. There was a time in Michigan history inside the prison, they snatched guys up and sent them to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, Virginia. Yep.
Well, without communicating. Yep. I mean, like folks was coming to visit their loved ones, and like he's not here.
Find out.
What do you mean he's not here?
That was in the 80s.
No,
90s?
No, that was like the 2000s, 90s.
Yeah, 2000.
I knew somebody who got snatched up and sent to Pennsylvania in the 80s. So, yeah.
I mean, and you were sentenced there to do at least a year, 2 years. If you didn't volunteer, you got beat up, put in the hole, and once you got out the hole, you were sent to Virginia. So again, if you can radically do something like that. But here's the thing about when we talk about prisons, we also have to talk about capitalism. I mean, you pay between $30,000 and $40,000 per year for a prisoner, and only between $6,000 and $12,000 for the education of a student, depending on what county you live in. I mean, you look at those numbers, and you see why we've had such a prison bloom within this country. So it's being able to cut through the narrative.
It's profitable, yes. Because it is profitable to run these prisons the way that we do it. Victoria, I want to have you speak a little bit about political will versus doing what's right. What is politically expedient? Donna mentioned earlier that the governor had an executive order that essentially was the impetus for us to get everybody's water turned back on. But a couple of weeks prior, she essentially rescinded a request on behalf of City Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield to declare a public health state of emergency because of the homes in the city of Detroit without water. She rescinded that literally a couple of weeks prior. But when the pandemic hit, it was politically expedient. What has to shift for us to do what's right? You're running for elective office. What has to shift for us to do what's right versus what is always politically expedient?
You got to have a moral compass. You have to have a moral compass. And if you want to run for an office and no one has asked you to, that might be the first red flag that you don't need to be in office. It might be. Are you doing it for the right reasons? I never wanted to run. I never wanted to be a prosecutor. I told Yusuf about it. I was repulsed by the idea because of what I thought a prosecutor had to stand for. I didn't understand that a prosecutor could actually use her power for good as the gatekeeper to the criminal justice system and keep people from coming into this system and being swallowed alive. But when I learned that, I said, I think I can do this. And then when I got deeper into it, I said, oh, I know I can because of the information that Shaka and Yusuf have explained. That's my background, the nexus of our African-American history with the US political system. And so to go back to your question of how do we as, and I don't even want to call myself an aspiring politician because I'm not, but people who are elected officials and those who seek office, how do you simply ensure that you're accountable to the people? You come from the people, you stay grounded to the people, the stories of the people. And so if you seek to use that office as a springboard to go somewhere else, that's the problem. You will never follow your moral compass because your compass will always be what can take you to the next office and the next office and the next piece of power. It's not about giving the people on the ground where you came from power. And if you don't come from the people on the ground, you won't have that mentality. It's not something that you can just go out and purchase by popping into a town hall or popping into a local elementary school with your photographer and your office full of 5 people that you travel with. It's not about that. It's about saying, I'm going into that community with Yusuf because he's going to take me where I really need to be, where I can make the most impact. And I can ask and listen, what do you need? It's not about me. It's about the people that I will serve. And that's what every elected official needs to understand. You are a servant. You serve people.
Somebody told me not too long ago that some people run for office because they want to do something. And some people run for office because they want to be something. You are running for office because you want to do something. You already are who you are. And I think that's another part of it is there are people who are trying to find their identity or trying to be powerful without really having a mandate even of their own. I think it's important to definitely communicate to the people what you want to do. I think it's equally important to raise the consciousness of people who have no idea what they don't know. You know, I think when Shaka says that we don't want to let people out because they will be exposed, we've got to do a better job, those of us who are allies, exposing some of that and making sure that that's part of the dialogue. A lot of people think that when people go to prison, they must have done something, and that without understanding that our criminal justice system is fundamentally broken, that some laws don't make much sense, and that the kinds of, you know, things that they do for young white men who mess up. And they say, well, you know, he had this troubled childhood. And they use that to mitigate whatever kind of sentence, but they don't do that for young Black men whose childhoods may be even more challenged and on top of that racism. And so I think it's important that we change the political dialogue a little bit. And I wonder how we go about doing that, because, you know, you go to a lot of churches and you go to a lot of places where you have people say that Black people can be very politically conservative. And there are many people who point out that there were pastors, not all of them, and politicians, not all of them, who supported the crime bill. So I'm wondering how you change that dialogue.
When you change the dialogue, again, is being able to re-educate people fundamentally of fear. I mean, fear is something that politicians use. More importantly, again, every year they always looking for new police officers. I mean, you can have 1 million police officers on the streets. If you don't address the fundamental thing of creating better, better outcomes for human beings to increase jobs for folks. I mean, I didn't have to go to University of Michigan to figure this out. I mean, it really you just got to give a fuck. You really just got to give a fuck, and they don't, and they don't in the sense of, because they never have. Why would they, when the fact that they can profit off of it? And so again, when you look at that's why I support Victoria's campaign, because it's looking at things differently. Now, are there some folks that may need to be incarcerated? I won't argue on that, but is incarcerating going to fix the problem? When Michelle Alexander dropped her book, The New Jim Crow. But again, if we listen to George Jackson, Soledad Brother, Blood in My Eye, many others, if we read Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, if we read Malcolm X, they've already exposed that, right? But because she fed a system, and she was part of the system in terms of being able to not address the fundamentality of the transformation. And this is how we change the conversation within pulling our resources. Because again, this all goes back to our original conversation. When you have a vulnerable population, prison becomes the outcome for dealing with what we call the renegades, the zoo individuals. But again, if we start from the beginning, investing, building up our communities. I mean, to Donna's point, I mean, we ask the question: so why is no murders in Grosse Pointe? They have a neighborhood. They have foundations.
They have communities that have been invested in.
Exactly.
They haven't been exposed to years of violence in prisons and come out committing more violence.
Exactly. They're no more smarter than us. They're no more human than us. But that's what society feeds us, and as a people, we buy into that.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there are murders in Grosse Pointe.
Yes, they are.
They don't get talked about as often. And there's, it's interesting because you would think only Black people kill people, because when you read the news, it's always the Black people who kill people. But the reality is that's a distorted decision to only report on certain crimes. Most murders never make it to the paper. But I think that, when you look at a city like Detroit, which really determines who becomes Wayne County prosecutor, and you have a prosecutor who charged, convicted, sentenced a woman for showing a gun when she felt threatened. And she was pregnant, and she delivered that baby in prison. And then when she was released, she decided to retry her. I don't remember the outcome. I think she may have been acquitted the second time.
Misdemeanors. Mm-hmm.
But it's so offensive to me that you look in Lansing and you see these men walking around open carrying, trying to scare the hell out of our legislature. And this woman simply showed she had a gun. She was an activist. She was a mother. She had no track record of any type of crime, and yet she was convicted. So I'm wondering how a Black woman gets reelected to prosecutor after she does that to a sister in our community. When I hear people say they don't care about us, this is us voting for her. And that's where I'm
She's
trying
never
to
run. She's never had a challenger to run against. So even if no one, so she's been in office for 16 years and she's never had a challenger on the ballot for the primary. And if you win the primary as a Democrat, you are going to win the final election in November because we don't elect Republican prosecutors in Wayne County. So if that is the only name on the ballot and has been so for the last 16 years, even if over half the people don't vote for her, she's still going to keep the office because no one ran against her.
But here's the other part too that I think, and I hope this will be valuable to your campaign, and definitely want to support you in whatever capacity that we can. One of the things about her being in office currently is because at one point she did something that the community considered heroic when she prosecuted the officers for Malice Green's murder, right? But here's the reality of most of our community is that we don't come in proximity to a prosecutor until we actually being prosecuted or going to support one of our loved ones who's being prosecuted or something of that nature. And so it's similar to what happens with policing in our community, where there's no proximity. Like, it's easy for them to get voted into office by people who are just voting whatever there. So we have to change that reality, right? Like, the first time a young Black man or a young Black woman, especially those of voting age now, comes in proximity, shouldn't be at a trial or at an arraignment. It should be, hey, I'm in the community to help. I really want you to understand this office and what the office powers is, because she's had that media machine behind her, and our people live in fear. Like, that's those are the facts, right? We operate out of that fear-based narrative of, oh, she's going to keep us safe. And if there's no other narrative about what it means to actually be safe, and that's in proximity to the people, they're going to keep voting her into office. You know what I mean? And so I think we have to change that proximity issue and the idea of what it is. Because, I mean, she's rolled the wave of that Malice Green for 16 years. Facts. Like, that's just what it is. Like,
no cap.
She was turned into a hero.
For longer. She was an assistant prosecutor when she worked on that case. And after that, she was a judge for 10 years prior to being the elected prosecutor. Yeah. So no, that was over 26 years ago.
Yeah. So she wrote, I mean, like that idea of that she's for us, and nobody's really challenged the fact and show how in so many different ways that she isn't. I think that's like a real thing, you know. And then it's also Wayne County, right? It's not just Detroit, you know what I mean, which is a whole nother animal. And if you're once you move outside of Detroit and you think about the people who are voting for a prosecutor, they're like, oh, yep, she locks Black people up and throw away the key. Like, that's why she goes as hard as she do, because she knows she's going to be able to get those voters.
Yeah. Well, you know, she's a Delta, right? And I know that because I have a lot of friends who are Deltas, and they're always, you know, to my sister. And I think that that's when people start voting for people based on social connections. And, you know, she went to U of M, and that's my girl. And so I think a lot of times people I know are very afraid to think critically and hold people accountable as they should. And so I think that it's important that we have conversations. I think it's important that we begin to change the dialogue. I think that people who don't know any better really do believe mythology, you know, just very incorrect facts about what's happening in the justice system, period. And we need to have better dialogue if we're going to change voting behavior, because we may not be able to persuade people in Outer Wayne County, but we're going to persuade people in Detroit. You have Devontae Sanford. You have
you had Sawatu, Devontae Sanford.
Devontae Sanford, the quarterback from Cass Tech. I can't think of his name.
Drew Campbell.
What is it?
All of the cases that her conviction integrity unit have handled in 2 years, they haven't even reached 20. And all of them go directly back to her office and prosecutorial misconduct or lack of investigation. Most of those cases, just reviewing the transcripts and reviewing the pleadings and the facts, they should have never gone to a trial. They should have never been convicted, and let alone have to go through the painful, slow process of having their innocence declared by a unit led by one attorney, because you won't fully fund it, because you don't really want to look behind the work that you've done. It all goes back to you.
Can I ask a question? Really, my first, I'll preface by saying I believe exposure provides a check for accountability, right? And my question is around how do we sort of harness the power of the people who actually care, right? When the Detroit Free Press broke the news about physical prison structure conditions, um, probably a month or two ago, we spoke to the medical head of the Michigan Department of Corrections, and she categorically denied that the prison structures were not deteriorating or molding. I have a brother who is in the Chippewa Valley Correctional Facility in the UP, and he tells me, stories all the time about unsanitary conditions. How do we provide a level of exposure that provides that check for accountability, and one, and two, and harness the power of the people who care? There has to be more people who care about this.
Right.
Yeah. I say the way that you harness that power is we have to lift the voices of the men and women who are behind bars and let them tell their story.
Yeah.
As Yusuf and I learned the hard way, when we came home, everybody wants to tell our story. Everybody wants to speak about us as opposed to allowing our voices to be heard from our own unique experience. And I say the same for my friends who are incarcerated. Like basically, I've asked them like, what is the best way to support y'all? And they was like, look, just get our words out. And so when they call, I'll record their calls and then I'll just share it on social media so they can hear directly from the men and women inside, because it's important that their voice be heard. Like the government is always going to have a governmental PR response. They're always going to say, oh, we're doing everything that's possible and we're doing it the smart way. They're never going to be like, yo, we weren't prepared. Like the reality is the regular government wasn't prepared for a global pandemic, let alone localized governments. Some have been more responsive than others. But for the most part, they haven't been as responsible as possible, and so you got to hear it from the people inside, and you got to hear their voice and what their experiences are like in order to really understand how do we best support them, and how do we get resources in when the government has failed. Like, when we did the mask thing, I was in kind of this. I was in this space where I was really upset, right? I was really upset that this is what was happening. On one hand, I felt blessed to be able to support men and women inside, right? But here it is, I'm a private citizen. And I'm responding in a way that we are paying the governors to respond. And to me, to think that you have to pull on celebrities and other people in order to even just get the stuff in, right? Like if I'd have just went lowly me and just went and said, hey, look, I got a donor that wants to donate this, I want to get these masks, they'd have slammed the door in my face. So I have to leverage relationships that are celebrity-driven relationships, you know what I'm saying? In order to do what the government is responsible for doing, and so that whole, these models that we have to operate out of in order to get resource to where they need to be, like it always leaves a space where you're like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, because I can't not support the brothers and sisters inside, but isn't that our government's responsibility? And so until we have to tell those stories, right? We can't, like, I'm intentional about pushing out the content because I want our people to start thinking critically about these issues. Like, why is it taking private citizens to raise money to get resources and supplies to a prison where our tax dollars are paid? This is their responsibility.
But so is there a way that we can help tell those stories, that we can help elevate those stories to other networks?
But let me say this though. It's more than a story. It's a narrative. Yeah. And the individual stories are part of a larger narrative. It's part of our communities. I mean, again, if you just talk about me without knowledge of my mother, the things that my mother went through, the knowledge of my father. I mean, this is what happens where we just get reduced to an individual story, where it's part, again, when you look at the absence of resources within our community and being able to, like, this is a part of a movement. This is an arm of a larger movement. And the arm of this larger movement is centering Black people, who is tied to the water crisis. Because again, if I ain't got water in my home and I can't get, and I go turn the key on so-called legally, they're gonna lock me up. I mean, this is This is how it systematically it functions, and we have to be able to break it down and tell it in that way. But also to amplify the stories of the narratives is to amplify and building a movement. And the movement has to be centered around values that put people first, that's centered around talking about the oppression that we've suffered, not only just in the recent times, but since we've been here. Sure. It's just changed over years.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the movement piece. I think that there's short-term things we can do, there's medium-term things, and there's long-term things. So we want Victoria to get elected, right? And that's in August?
Yes, August 4th, 90 days from today.
All right, so we got 90 days to get Victoria elected, right? And then the second thing is we want to make sure that we try to at least raise and amplify the need for direct action inside of Michigan prisons right now while people are still infected and dying. And we don't want to have to use celebrities to get in there. So somehow, how do we make that part of the conversation? When people talk about water shutoffs, when people talk about everything, how do we make sure that's part of the conversation as well? And you know, hearing from people inside to push back against the narratives of people who are running these systems. And full disclosure, the person who came on here and talked about whatever, that's my cousin. And so I'm trying to work within my family system to try to help raise her consciousness, you know, because I was devastated when we asked the question and we got the answer that I was like, are you serious? And so Orlando just stopped asking questions because he wanted to respect family. But I'm saying that to say, what are some short-term things we can do to get stories out so people know that people are dying inside and what's happening, and what are some long-term things? The movement building, I support We the People. I think we need to continue growing that and growing our work with We the People and other activists out there in the community. And I'm interested in learning if there are other movement pieces, but what else do you recommend?
Well, Donna, let me say this to that question. I'm glad you asked the question. I'm sorry to jump in, but having brothers that are incarcerated, I think what the loved ones of the folks that are incarcerated have to do is get rid of the illegitimate shame that we feel when we have people who are connected to us who are incarcerated, right? Because normative society would harness that connection and project that fear onto those of us who love people who are in prison. So I think we need to start by first looking intrinsically and dispelling any fear or illegitimate shame that we have because we have loved ones who are incarcerated. That's my first point. I'll start with that, and then I'll yield to the panel.
But I think like we've identified the language, which is there's a death sentence that these men and women now have. And being able to rally around that, and that is an extension again of everything else. Because what happens, unfortunately, in our community, we end up competing against each other around issues instead of we weaving them together. I mean, thinking about we're talking about a story. I mean, the brother that had a parole and came home and died from it. I mean, there's no more greater story than to tell than that one. No, that happened right here in Michigan a couple of weeks ago. And so being able to uplift that and tie that in. I mean, the reality. I mean, these men and women don't have death sentence. Now they have death sentence. And you're talking about environments that are very controlling. There's no such thing as social distance in prison. I mean,
talk a little more about that, Yusuf.
What, no social distance?
Yeah, in prison.
I mean, it's quasi. I mean, called you quasi.
Yo, brothers,
right. As Shaka acknowledged earlier, I mean, he talked about the one prison where it's cubicle, where there's multiple guys open. In reality, the reality, unless you're at a level 4 or level 5 or level 6, there's only one level 6 prison in Michigan. You're single bunk. Every other prison, you have a bunkie. Mm-hmm. So if you have a bunkie, you're always going to be social. You're interacting with someone. I mean, when you learn from my father, I'm pretty sure if you talk to your brother in terms of going to the shower, they're not letting guys one by one. They're not doing 6 feet apart. None of that. So again, I mean, you're talking about a very controlled environment that doesn't allow for folks to function that way. I mean, to Shaka's point earlier, I mean, again, you have prisons that's closed that they can begin to create and do things with, but you're not radically willing to do things outside the box.
And you're not willing to do that because we don't care. And I say we because if I point the finger at them, that lets off so many of us. No, we collectively have not shown enough care for our people, for our Black men. And now, as Shaka has said, our Black women, our Sawatus of the world, we have not shown the right amount of care. When people are going into these prisons, they are going in hoping that they can come back out. And what we're seeing is people, they are accused of doing something, whether they've done it or not, and they automatically get pushed over to being the bad person for the rest of their lives. And we don't do anything to deconstruct that narrative, as Yusuf has said. And so when you talk about those stories have to include folks like Mr. Williamson, who had an opportunity to get out of prison from committing a murder at the age of 16. And he was a middle-aged man who had multiple times asked to be released as a former juvenile lifer. And once he was finally given the nod and the okay to be released after fighting, he passed away from COVID-19. That is unacceptable. It is unacceptable that we put people in cages and don't realize that we cleared out those same spaces for our most precious people, our children. We made sure to close our schools for our babies, but we didn't do anything for our prisons because we don't care. And we don't care because they're bad people and they're not like us and they cause harm to our community and we're safer with them in there. Yeah, and we do ourselves a disservice.
And I think that's so true on so many levels. And to Yusuf's point earlier, when we think about just the structural breakdown that's created these narratives from our schools that basically are preparing young people for a life of servitude in prisons, to our hospitals who are grossly inadequate in their ability to address gun-related trauma, sexual assault, interpersonal violence, and all the things that has led to this collective PTSD. It's hard to empathize with people and be compassionate and loving when you're operating out of a trauma lens that has gone unaddressed. And like that collective trauma is a real thing in our community, you know what I mean? And so we have to address that and be honest. And when you think about prison, usually when they talk about prison, they're like the violent versus non-violent, right? And usually when they say non-violent, it's only non-violent drug-related cases. But part of it is that we have to tell the narrative of who is in prison. Like there are people in prison who couldn't pay child support. There are people in prison who had a technical violation. There are people in prison who are people in prison. You know what I'm saying? But all those conversations are equally important because that's what really opens up heart spaces in our community. It helps us actually see things. Like I couldn't even imagine, you know, when the time frame we went in the 90s, you know, it was such a different thing. Like the full-on assault on the war on drugs was like raging at the highest level possible. So there's no way possible that we can be doing what we're doing today had we had that happen in that climate. You know what I mean? So yes, we saw some incremental changes, some societal shifts, but we have to do a whole lot more if we're going to have the type of impact. And right now, we just running out of time. And I'll say this last thing on this issue that isn't being paid attention to. And when we're talking about narrative, this is what's going to happen in the cell blocks. Within the next few weeks, as more people die and the government fails to react, the men and women inside are going to start being reactive. You're going to start seeing more takeover of the cell blocks. You're going to start seeing more hostilities between the men and women who work there versus the men and women who are actually there. And basically the story that's going to come out of that is going to demonize these people who are literally reacting out of the fear that they're going to die because they're sitting ducks in this environment right now. And if we don't address the urgency of that, that's going to be the story we're going to be talking about literally in the next 2 or 3 weeks, is how many of these prisons have erupted and what they're going to say are riots, but really they're going to be acts of desperation to call attention to the reality that we are not responsible enough and that these people will die on our watch if we don't do something with the level of urgency that we've done everything else.
To sort of build off of that, Shaka, I want to ask you about, news broke Saturday that the Michigan National Guard is going to begin assisting the Michigan Department of Corrections in making sure that every prisoner in the state of Michigan, 38,000, gets tested. Now, we've been in a state of emergency since March. Is it too late to be urgent? Is what you're talking about already here and we haven't heard about it yet?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is when you look at the top 8 out of 10 spaces of hotbeds for the virus, it's already here. And so the testing is coming at a time that is possibly too late. Like there are men and women who are dying like right now. Like I'm afraid to look at the numbers like a week from now.
Yeah.
You know, and to hear what those numbers, like every Sunday my friends call and I clear that day for those phone calls. And it's literally depressing on so many levels because it has gotten worse every week, and the desperation in their voice has intensified every week. The only saving grace is that I'm always intentional, and we're always intentional about finding something to try to make each other laugh, at least for that brief moment, to be human and for them to know that, you know, there's a safe space for them. But I think, you know, absent like getting people into space where they can get treatment. The other thing is this, right? These prisons are in rural areas, as you mentioned earlier, right? That means that their hospitals in those communities are ill-equipped to deal with the fallout that's definitely coming. You know, so we're going to see bodies piling up. We're going to see people dying. We're going to see people who work in there quitting, like, because they're already at that tension point where a lot of them are like, I'm not going in there. You know what I mean? So it's like I said, it's a humanitarian crisis powder keg.
Well, you know, I've heard already that there are hospitals near prisons that don't want to accept prisoner patients because they believe that that's going to make the town sick. And so I think that that's the other thing to watch out for is health systems that are not also being monitored in these spaces. We already have a health system problem in Detroit where hospitals are turning away Black people that they should be accepting, admitting, testing, and treating. And so that's part of the disproportionality of disease and death. But in certain places, hospitals may have the option of not admitting patients who need care. I think that was Yusuf who said, if it's bad out here, just imagine it being there. And so how do we even monitor or know if that's happening?
I think
you know what?
Part of pushing with Whitner, the governor, like her racial equity advisory folks that she got.
Task force, yeah.
The task force, pushing on that, because here's another. I mean, to Shaka point, and to the question around the National Guards. I mean, we've all seen historically what does that happen when the National Guards come into the Black community. So again, imagine going inside of a prison. I mean, it's not going to be good. And again, and because of their ability to control the narrative, we're not going to hear those stories until guys starting to sneak out, get the info from them to what's really going on. And so again, we need to humanize those inside, and we need folks to respond in a very human way, not in a. I mean, you know, you're coming in like as if you're invading a occupying country. I mean, this is what you bring in the National Guards for.
Right.
And it's, you know,
this is exactly why too we should have been much quicker to do something, because it's at a point where we are too late. We have already lost people, and we are on the beginnings of prison riots. People did not understand in the beginning, look, it is in your best interest in a community. If you live in a community where there's a prison or a jail, it's in your best interest to advocate for release, because if they get sick, you get sick. They are not there to stay forever. Jails, certainly, county jails are revolving doors. Prisons to a certain extent as well, because people who go in there to work have to also come out to their families. Absolutely. And those people live in the area of the prisons. So it benefits everybody to think about those people and not throw them away. I keep going back to that because that really is the foundation of the issue. You just thought you could throw people away, human beings, and now you are about to pay the price. And there is not anything or anyone that is coming to save you.
One thing that I would bring up in response to that, especially when we talk about communities that encompass or have prisons in there is no, they don't want to deal with the fallout. They don't want to deal with the sicknesses. The hospital doesn't want to accept folks. But one of the things that I will point out this year is that this year is a census year. And one of the things in my research that I found is that inmates are counted toward not the communities that they come from, but the communities where the prisons are. And so, and you have an additional benefit and added resources coming to your community based off the prisoner population that exists. You don't want to have anything to do with caring for them. So, yeah.
You know, I have a question about the Guard, National Guard. Doesn't that add to the narrative of fear? Like my first memory when I was 3 years old was the National Guard coming to Detroit to put down the riots, and now, or the rebellion. Now we have the National Guard going into prisons, and you know that left a lifetime scarring impact of fear on me as a small child. And I always knew they were there. When I got older, I knew they were there because they were trying to deal with the unruliness or whatever the perceptions were of Black people, not dealing with our problems. Now we're sending them to prisons, and there people are going to say that's okay. And if there is a riot while they're there, or something happens while they're there, it's going to be further evidence of them not being fit for society. So I wonder how we try to protect people who are in prison from that narrative jumping off. Like, do we want to get out in front of it?
Yeah. And so I think there definitely has to be a part two. Our guests have additional obligations. We're coming up on an hour and a half. I guess what we can do, what I would like to do is end it and give Victoria the floor. Victoria is running for Wayne County prosecutor. And you sort of alluded to some of the things that you want to do, but we simply wanted to ask you why Victoria, why now, why you?
So as I stated, this was not my idea. I did not think that I would ever be in this place. I was very happy being what I considered to be a people's lawyer. Charles Hamilton Houston said that in this skin with the law degree, you can either be a social engineer for justice or a parasite on your community. And I live those words every day. I thought it was an honor and a privilege. It's a sense of entitlement. It is. To have something that not many Black folks have access to. And so with that entitlement comes a responsibility, and you got to use it to reach back and bring them with you, right? And so I was very content being a criminal defense attorney fighting for people. And it's gotten to a point in my career where I realized my toolbox is rather small. And there's only going to be so much that I can do to protect people from the system because, quite frankly, I'm a part of the carceral state as a defense attorney. I can't protect them from coming in. I have to wait for them to come into this system before I can even try to help them. And at that point, again, my toolbox is small. You've already been eaten alive by this machine and you just don't know it. And so has your family, and they don't know it yet. And so in my time as a defense attorney, I have seen people be overcharged. I've seen them plead guilty to crimes that they didn't do or that there wasn't evidence to prove that they did just because they're scared, because they can't afford the bail and they need to get back home to their families because they're the only person, making money. And some of them, I've had clients drive for Uber and say, if I don't get out of this jail to get back home to make the money, I'm not going to be able to pay rent and I'm not going to be able to take care of my kids. I have to get out of here. And by the way, I didn't even do this. And they will plead guilty to a crime and have a criminal record just for that. And understanding that, I know that we are just throwing around phrases like ending mass incarceration, or fighting to reform the criminal justice system, if we don't knock out the gatekeeper to the system who has created and continue to create those inequities. And so I want to be Wayne County's next gatekeeper because I understand what cash bail does to families that are poor. I understand that over 70% of the people in our county jails in the state of Michigan are there because they deal with mental health issues and substance abuse issues. I understand what happens to people when they're overcharged, when they're over sentenced. We are sending children to prison. Kim Worthy charged a 10-year-old Black boy in Canton last year with assault after throwing a dodgeball. That was a wake-up call to me. I had been asked to run for this office most of last year, and I said no. And it was at that point where I said, I gotta do this. I have to do it. I have seen this system decimate Black families. And again, I went to Michigan with Yusuf, and well, we didn't go at the same time, but we both got that education. And we know that, and I have a political science degree and an African American studies degree, and I know how they meet and where they meet. And I can't in good conscience know the power that I have and not use it to help the people where I come from. So that's why I'm running. I know Shaka has to go. I don't want to be rude, but yes, that's why I'm running.
Well, thank you
Thank you so
much. If you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Authentically Detroit, or email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. With about a minute left, anybody got anybody they want to shout out before we head out?
What up, though, Detroit? I love y'all. Good seeing my bro, Yusuf. We go all the way back to the cell blocks. So I'm super proud of you, brother. I just want to say that for people who don't really understand the dynamics of our relationship over here. I've seen every iteration of my brother in his evolution, man. And so it's always good whenever we can just be in these type of conversations, because we used to do this in the cell blocks and chow hall and in solitary confinement, everywhere else we found ourselves in there, man. So love you deeply, brother. Supporting you, Victoria. Thanks again, Don and Orlando, for having me. It's always good to rock with my Detroit people. So I got to go fix dinner for my little one. But
we love you, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great seeing you.
Bye.
Victoria and Yusuf, you guys have anybody you want to shout out before we head out?
My people. I just love my people. All of my people. I'm not going to single out anybody, but I love my people.
Nice.
I mean, I'm just trying to make a difference.
Shout out Victoria and Yusuf, because we are so fortunate to have, first of all, Yusuf is leading the way in so many ways and is walking it like he talks it and bringing truth to every room he walks into.
Every room.
That is much appreciated. I still need your book because I don't have one. I want an autographed copy, so you have to let us know how to get that. And Victoria, I graduated from Michigan with a degree in political science and African American history, so I know that has to be why we connect, because we were studying the same things from the same place while stuck in a racist environment, which, you know,
bubble
is a whole nother conversation. I was there before you, but it was a mess then too.
Yusuf, you got shout outs?
I give a shout out to my pops, man. You know, who I am and what I is doing, couldn't without him, along with my mother. So I come from good stock. The 10,000 masks that we're trying to get out and me emphasize, because that's not a lot of numbers. You know, as we talked about earlier, we're trying to save lives, and if we're not responsible for saving our own lives, then you know, what can we say? Who can we blame? There's enough resources within the Black community. The question is, are we really using the resources to impact people? And our goals with these masks is really getting to fundamentally to people who are the most vulnerable, the brothers and sisters on the block who can't afford to buy a mask. I mean, people who are required to go back to work in their jobs are not supplying masks. I mean, it exposes so much of this society that many of us talk about every day, right? It just gives us more ammunition to hope it, you know, we take a break to breathe and cry and then get back at it.
Yeah.
Let's link up, Yusuf, on distribution of supplies.
Okay.
I want to shout out all of the families that have been ravaged by the criminal justice system here in the city of Detroit and within the state of Michigan, with unfortunately no real accountability on part of the MDOC. I see you. I'm one of those people. I want to shout out my brother who's serving time in a Chippewa Valley facility in the UP in unsanitary conditions. I also want to shout out every single Michigander and Detroiter who has been adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. If you lost someone, if you lost a friend, a loved one, a pastor, anybody that you're connected to, we see you, we love you, and we are grieving with you. So thank you all once again so much for coming on. You all made this great and rich, and we will see you next time. Catch the wave.